on the bottom bar down. So you may see it now. Okay. So you may use also this language button. And the third important thing is that this session is being recorded. So by continuing to watch it, you have to be aware that it's being recorded and it may be used for further publication of this event and promoting activities. So first of all, I'd like to welcome also the speakers who will be providing out their views on these important issues. We have the representatives from public institutions as well as from the industry. I'd like to welcome Mr. Štefanec, who is the member of European Parliament and will provide us the view of his party on the legislative act and as well as on the ongoing efforts and situation in the European Parliament, since there is a huge kind of development and discussions for the last many years already, many months already. Also, I'd like to welcome Mr. Martin Ulbrich from DG Connect, that is representing the European Commission and who is within the unit that deals with AI Act. He will also provide us his views on the current status of the AI Act and also the brief description of it, and especially also on the global aspects of the ambitions, let's say, of the European Commission and European Union with this legislation. Then we have Malte Firus from the company Amazon, who will share his insight on how AI is transforming our lives and digital and economy and society, how they may be kind of effective, how they see the current regulation, what they see in AI, and actually what we can maybe expect in the coming months to come. And then we have also Ondřej Vykoukal, who is an attorney in law, who is advising clients, businesses, SMEs, and innovation startups on the aspects of AI. He's from the law firm Kroll Pahelan, and he also partnership with innovation hubs like Prague AI. Unfortunately, today we could not have Mr. Liška with us, who declined at the latest notice his participation due to personal reasons. And before we go to the topic of AI Act, I'd like to say a few words on the current situation where we are. Most of us, I guess all of us, became aware of the AI actually, and we already experience it in a way, irrespective whether we feel it or not. Actually, if we use navigation, if we use our smartphones, AI is behind, and sometimes we may not be aware of it. But what has changed since the last, let's say, few years, of course, and months, is really that there is stronger computing power behind it. We have more data, we have much more teams, let's say, and investments going into the AI, as well as in particular, we have stronger algorithms. So, I would like to provide a few numbers at the beginning of this discussion. And almost 2 years ago, it's only 2 days left to the 21st April 2021, the Commission proposed this far-reaching legislation. The ChatGPT, which I would like to mention during these discussions, because this is not just making the headlines, but it's really important for our topic today, since it also affects the discussions the European Union and the member states has concerning the current draft and the impacts on the legislation, how it's written. So the ChatGPT was launched at the end of November last year. Then the Council of the EU adopted on the 6th of December its general approach to the proposal made by the Commission. And within the 2 months after release of ChatGPT, it has 100 million users. So it's the most popular application based on the AI-driven engine ever. Just to compare, let's say Instagram takes 2 years and Google almost one year to cross the 100 million users. And but while we are kind of impressed of these capabilities, AI also opens many questions on our future. On one side, it's really an engine and provides a potential to boost our economies, to increase the quality of the services we have, to increase the capabilities of different sectors in healthcare, in logistics, in transport, in everywhere. Actually, there is not a sector that would be not touched by the application. But of course, it also opens out many societal and ethical questions we need to face. And this is also making, let's say, the headlines of experts. For example, many of you may be aware of the open letter from the Future of Life Institute, which addresses or asking for the temporary ban, let's say, of development of such a large language model, for example, which is the kind of generative AI, at least for the 6 months, in order to stop for a while and to think about the implication which this technology is making. But also not only experts has been kind of waken up, also the legal community and the consumer community. There are ongoing proceedings in Italy, for example, and as well, and concerning the alleged violation of GDPR by this generative AI, in particular the chat GPT. And there are proceedings before the Federal Trade Commission in the United States, initiated by the Center for Digital Policies and Artificial Intelligence. And also the biggest consumer organization, BEUC, is calling for EU and national authorities to launch an investigation into ChatGPT. So, and there are also countries which are kind of struggling with banning the use of ChatGPT in their territories. So it looks like a lot of it is at stake now. So despite the importance to address the regulatory challenges 2 years ago, it looks like that the development since last few months already paid more attention on the issue that we are going to discuss. Fortunately, we have representatives from European institutions here and also from the business sector. And it would be really interesting and inspirational, I hope, for you to hear about their views, how they see the current development and what we may expect. And actually how, as a Europe, we would like to have on one side, the innovative ecosystem here, but on the other side, the sufficient protection of fundamental human rights, democratic values, let's say, and principles, for example, of rule of law. So this is something which is a really hard task. This is the first thing. The second is that we are kind of, what I'm aware, and we're in the middle of the negotiations now. So we'll see how far we can go with our partners here, since there is the vote expected in the European Parliament on this file soon on the committee side and afterwards in plenary. But I'd like that issue to be addressed by our colleagues here from the institutions. So we are discussing at the right time, but on the other side, there may be a lot of uncertainty and a lot of open questions that likely we would be not able to close them today. So we will split the discussions into the small blocks. We started with the current status quo of negotiations, then we will go deeper into the AI Act, mainly to the risk-based approach, which is the main principle behind the legislation. Then we will go on the, let's say, comparison of the global scale of the European Union regulatory framework as well as innovation framework. And also we try to cover, let's say, the way how the public authorities communicate with the stakeholders, whether this development should not also kind of bring new ideas, how we can work, let's say, the triple helix model that academia, businesses, and public sector can really prepare the future-proof regulation in this regard. So moving to the first topic and on the mapping of the status quo, I'd like to ask our panelists, and once again, I'm glad that we can discuss it today, is what comes to your mind when you hear the AI and regulation? And please, maybe Mr. Stefanec, what is the, let's say, first thing that pop-ups in your head when somebody say AI and regulation?
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's really great to be with you. What has come to my mind, it is opportunity. It is a change and opportunity. I'd like to see also changes always as the opportunity rather than threat. And of course, it comes with new potential threat as well, and therefore we have to be aware of that. But first of all, I'd like to see all the coming changes as the opportunity which can be used on behalf of people.
Thank you very much. Perfect start with, because the opportunity has the positive attitude narrative, which is important in this topic. Martin, what are the first sides when you hear AI regulation?
Well, thank you very much. I find myself in a very strange world. I mean, I've been doing regulation for some time, and we always have a situation where you have NGOs, academics, and all that kinds of other groups thinking that we should regulate, and then industry telling us that you should not regulate or less regulate. And all of a sudden, since well, for the last 4 weeks, we're in the situation where we have plenty of industry people telling us, regulate, please, we need more regulation. So it's extremely unusual as a situation. I think we should stay calm. ChatGPT is very impressive, it's very fast, but let's maybe just, for some of the things we hear about this, many people are afraid that ChatGPT, for example, is going to take away your jobs, because it writes papers better or speeches, and what are all these journalists and other people are going to do? Maybe it's good to keep it in perspective. Let's go back 10 years in time, and there was a time when AI was becoming really fashionable. 5 years before, there had been a book that there was by Björnson, very famous American academic, saying there would be no self-driving cars in the streets for 50 years. And then by 2013, 14, 15, everybody thought self-driving cars would be around the streets, actually, around the corner. Actually, for 2020, we expected them in the street. I mean, people expected to have self-driving cars by 2020. And therefore, people were afraid for all the lorry drivers and taxi drivers and said, what they're going to do, all of them will be out of the job in 10 years. We have to do something. Now in 23, there are no self-driving cars. And as a matter of fact, there are now lorry drivers and taxi drivers missing, partly because everybody told them there would be no jobs for them. So yes, ChatGPT is extremely impressive, et cetera, but we should calm down, think quietly about these things, and not just go after the first hypothesis saying this is going to take over the world. Let's regulate where it needs to be done after reflection and not as a spontaneous reaction. That's my first take, I would say.
Thank you very much, Martin. I think it sounds quite reasonable, and really to keep a calm mind, it's very important, especially you as a part of the trialogue, incoming trialogue on this AI. Malte, what pop-ups in your head hearing the AI regulation?
Yeah, I would probably keep it very short because there's so much to say about that. I mean, me thinking about AI, first thing would be there are great opportunities, and there's great responsibility. Considering the various challenges, we of course need to face both. And yeah, happy to discuss this today.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Andrzej.
Well, good afternoon, first of all, and thank you for having me. My first thoughts probably would be, oh my, because regulating of every new technology is always tricky, and especially in this case, when we have new technology developing in enormous speed. So the discussion about AI Act started in 3 years ago, and the development in AI sector during these 3 years were, from my perspective as a lawyer and non-technology expert, it was enormous. So, oh my, would be my first reaction, but also it's a very interesting time for me as a lawyer from technology sector, because this regulation could change the game for many years. So, oh my, and looking forward.
That's great. I like your looking forward. Yeah. So yeah, thank you very much, colleagues. Okay, we may go to the first kind of kickoff topic, which is the current status quo. I guess most of the attendees here are already aware of the AI Act. We will go deeper a little bit to the extent we can on the what's written there and what are the main principles. But maybe especially from you, Martin, and Mr. Štefanec, if we can hear a little bit of what's going on in the European institutions now, and also maybe how it actually kind of fall down within the current legislation we have, because it's not only the AI Act, we do have also DSA, DMA, so Digital Services Act, Digital Market Acts. There are data acts like Data Governance Act and Data Act. So it's a kind of full AI rule book, which impose a lot of kind of obligations, not only on the innovators and the developers and deployers of the systems, but also on the users per se, and on the member states, especially on the member states. So we understand that you are kind of in the heavy task. It's pity a little bit that we don't have Mr. Liška here, because he can present the view of the member state, but we will just tackle it from your perspective. So can you, Mr. Stefanis, tell us a little bit what's going on in the European Parliament about the AI Act currently now, and what we may expect in the coming weeks and months? And afterwards, I'd like to ask Martin for his view.
Sure. First of all, you're absolutely right. The AI Act is not something which is separate piece of legislation. It co-creates also the legislative framework together with DSA, DMA, Data Act, Cybersecurity Act, and etc. So it will do all the package which will create and it will provide the platform for next development in the digital age. Secondly, I'd like to highlight also the point that we are not dealing from ground zero, because we established quite a while ago also the special committee for artificial intelligence in digital age, and this committee published also quite a comprehensive report. Thirdly, where we are right now, we are discussing on the political level among committees. Next week, this is a really topical debate, because next week there will be final vote in the committee, the IMCO committee, Intermarket committee, and LIBE committee together, and we expect the plenary vote, final decision by the end of May. So this is a time in the European Parliament where final changes making, where final compromises making, also among political groups. We have some principles which we have to apply from my political group and from also my personal position, that we should have quite clear definition what is AI, what is not AI, and definitely at the end, a human being is the decision maker. So this is, I think, the key, that AI is the tool. It's a service for us. We as human beings must be decision makers at the end, and I think those principles will be kept.
Thank you very much. So crucial period we are living, and that you are in a position really kind of heavy and finalized negotiation, at least on the committee level now. So Martin, what's your view on that actually, and if you can elaborate on that from your perspective?
Yeah, there are actually two different issues. I mean, let's maybe start with the interaction between the AI Act and other legislation. It is totally right that in addition to the AI Act, also all kinds of other legislation currently either just adopted or in the process of being adopted, the DSA, DMA, Data Act, Data Governance Act. But more importantly, there is already existing legislation which applies to AI. It's not like today you can adopt AI, do something with AI and there's no legislation, because that's not true. For example, General Data Protection Regulation applies. You know that Italy had problems with ChatGPT, and that was based on the General Data Protection Regulation, which is already in force. So even today there is legislation. GDPR is the most famous, but there's also the Unfair Commercial Practices Act, the non-discrimination directives, there's the general product safety legislation. There are plenty of things which are applicable depending on what exactly it is you're doing. So the AI Act is not supposed to give you new rights. It's supposed to make sure that the rights which you have under existing legislation remains applicable, because AI is a different technology. It's not really very transparent, and therefore the application of existing rights you have may become impossible unless you actually take measures. If you, for example, non-discrimination, you have to show that there's no discrimination. But if you don't know how a system arrives at a result, it's impossible to do that. So the purpose of AI Act is not to create new legislation, new legislation, but not new rights. It's supposed to make sure that existing rights continue to apply. That's on the legislative interplay. On the process, this has been going on for quite a long time. The Commission's strategy started in 2018. We had then had the high-level group from 2018 to 2019. We had the guidelines of the high-level group, which were opened up for public consultation. We had like 600 comments. The high-level group, then they revised the guidelines. Then in 2020, we had the white paper. There was more than 1,200 comments to that. And then eventually we had the proposal. So there's been a very wide debate. I mean, this has been debated for now 5 years with a lot of participation. In the white paper, we had comments from countries which usually don't participate in European consultation: Brazil, Iraq, Mexico, countries which are not that often represented. And then we published the regulation in 2021. The council has been has already achieved, as you pointed out, its general approach. From our point of view, we're quite happy because it has mostly maintained the structure of the proposal we've made. Of course, there are some changes in there. And among other things, it has extended the transition period until it actually applies to companies from 2 to 3 years. So that means that assuming the parliament will now come to a conclusion, let's say in May or in June, and then they agree with the council after, let's say, 6 months of trilogue, we're coming to an actual implementation for companies by early 27. For countries, it's different. Member states, they would have to create the authorities pretty much straight away. I mean, I think in the first couple of months, so that the authorities are already there, and then companies can start to use them from 2027 onwards. So no, that's quite a long delay between the first discussion start in 2018 and the actual legislation in 2027. And as has been said, there has been a lot of development in AI. It has to be said that the discussion hasn't started from scratch, but the legislative instrument has started from scratch. Normally, when you have a legislation on the European level, either you amend something which exists already, or you form something, or if you have a new topic, you have a model in a member state, or maybe in a third country, something where you can see how it has worked in the past, where you can build upon. In this case, we're starting from scratch. Nobody anywhere on Earth has done anything like that before. So it's really been invented from point zero, which is one of the reasons why it's such a big topic, and also why it hasn't taken so much time. And last but not least, I would like to underline the trilogue is actually mostly a dialogue. I mean, the Commission has made the proposal, and the Commission was there in the Council and the Parliament to explain, to clarify things. But it's really now the Council and the Parliament who decide. I mean, the Commission is there maybe trying to broker a compromise, but it's at this stage, the substance is out of the hand of the Commission. It's really the Council and the Parliament who are the co-legislators, not the Commission. So, we can be in the meeting and try to help the other two to get along, but in the end, it's the Council and the Parliament decide, not, and the Commission is only assistant there.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you very much for these insights. I think not many of the attendees here, at least me, was not aware that it was kind of started so soon, and it takes up to 9 years. So when you said the expected time of the entry into force of AI Act by 2027. So, but it's really kind of challenging tasks, and with or without ChatGPT or generative AI, we see how difficult it is. And
sorry. So just to be clear, I mean, the AI Act actually enters into force something like 20 days after it has been agreed. But the application for companies, the requirements they have to fulfill, they only come into force 2, that's a Commission proposal, or 3, that's a Council proposal, years after the entry of into force of the AI Act.
Yes, to provide them sufficient time, of course, to adapt to these requirements. Thank you. Andre, maybe since we heard a lot about the intersection, of course, of AI Act and legislative, and you as a lawyer and lawyer with expertise to advise clients, businesses, and different institutions on the aspects of this digital legislation, how do you see the current development? And actually, are in fact, let's say, small middle companies, since irrespective of the size of the company, anybody who is, for example, developing AI high-risk systems would be affected by the legislation, highly affected. Do they have the capabilities to follow that? Actually, do they know what's going on? Or they have you, for example, that you advise them on, or they just said it's something which would not affect us? So what's your view on that? Is the business community ready and able to follow actually those discussions?
Yeah, I have to say that the business community is definitely not ready, especially in my area of small and medium businesses and early stages AI startups. They are really in a difficult position. They do not have capacity to follow the negotiation. To be honest, it's quite a challenging, even for me, and I should be professional in this area. So we have clients with 4 employees or 4 not employees. They are founders. They do not have any employees. They are developing ethically responsible general purpose AI. So AI Act should be really important for them, but they do not have any information about it because they do not have capacity to follow. It's not critic of legislative process, but it's a reality of these startups. So I had a meeting with one of our clients last week, and I told her, you know, AI Act, general purpose artificial intelligence would be treated in a similar way as a high risk system, or could be treated. So that can have a huge impact on your business. And she said, really? I don't know it. So situation of these startups are tricky, but it's not only about AI. It's the same story about every regulation, but with this maybe more complicated regulation. If you compare it to other regulation, it's a different story for them.
Perfect. Thank you, Andre. So we see how difficult it may be also for you, but especially for those who would be affected by that legislation. And having said that and heard that, we have Malte here from Amazon, and I would be interested in his view on that. And Malte, we may maybe join it with the questions. The first one, thank you for that, we have in Q&A section, is the question that do you think that we really need a special piece of law for AI? A lot of laws are technology neutral, meaning that they are applicable regardless of the technology used. So I would be interested if you can address that question and to hear your view on that.
Yeah, that's a difficult one. Well, maybe first of all, also what I heard now from the Commission, from Parliament, I really have great respect for policymakers' effort to, release to agree on a reasonable regulation. That's a huge responsibility, particularly considering that this regulation has two objectives, right? The one is to support innovation in the EU, and the other one is to build trust. And both are, of course, important, but they, at the same time, must not be a trade-off. So that's what we believe both can be achieved. And as such, we support actually the AI Act regulation in these objectives. We believe this can work. It can protect Europeans and encourage innovation. And we also believe that this risk-based approach is the right choice for this. I think in so far, industry broadly agrees. Policymakers broadly agree, not all, but most. The question then is, as often, well, the devil is then in the detail. It's also Andre, you said, well, on that level, still easy, let's say. So we'll certainly have a chance also to discuss some of the details today. So having said this, we have a lot of questions, and we have, of course, also concerns, not with regard to the basic structure of this regulation, but more than concerning the question, are the provisions, are the definitions specific enough? Do they provide the right legal certainty? Do companies such as Amazon, and then, of course, all the small companies that are also in scope, understand how these rules apply, whether they apply? And there are also quite interesting studies out, and just to quote one from, I think, December last year, exploring the impact of AI Act on startups in Europe, which was a survey where one of the interesting findings is that nearly half of startup or small companies consider their services under high-risk categories, which is significantly different from what the Commission has assumes, maybe also simply because the definitions are read differently. So I think there's a lot of work that still need to be done now in the Parliament, in the Council, and then in the trilogue, of course. And that is there's a lot at stake. Meaning what we see is that Europeans will simply lose out if they cannot get all the benefits that may result from AI technology. We will also talk about the risks, but there are also, of course, huge benefits. And an AI Act that is not sufficiently clear, that is not addressing the real risks, of course, may then have an impact that is not intended, that might not be positive for Europe. So that could then apply and restrict beneficial use cases, low-risk use cases. And I think this, as said, concern is widespread across industry. And well, of course, we have also presented these views jointly with others to relevant policymakers.
Thank you, Marta, for this. Yeah, you open up an interesting question about the portion of how many, let's say, AI systems already or solutions would fall within the high risk category or even the prohibited one, and which would be the, let's say, less regulated, because I think it's changing very much. Sometimes I heard somewhere it's 85 to 15%. I think at the beginning of the discussions, maybe Martin may correct me, but what I know from the public sources was that actually the low amount of or low portion of ODA system should be treated as a high risk system. But now we see on one side we narrow down the definition to make it, let's say, more appropriate, at least in the general approach. But on the other side, let's say we included this generative AI or general purpose AI, which is kind of broadening the scope of the application, and especially on the when we talk about the high risk. So thank you very much for that. And we are going now deeper a little bit to the AI Act, at least what we can say. And I would like to give the word now to Martin as from the institution that came up with the proposal. Martin already told us that how difficult it is to even prepare it, how much discussion you want to have in order to tackle all the challenges. And I will leave it up to you, up to the attendees, whether it is enough, not enough, whether it goes fast enough or it's slow. But maybe, Martin, if you can really provide very brief, let's say, description of AI briefly in few sentences. We mentioned this risk-based approach. Maybe not everybody is aware. What does it mean, actually? What are the main principles and features of AI Act? So if you may spend a few words on that.
Yeah, so basically the AI Act is, as you said, is based on a risk-based approach. That means that while it covers AI in general, only the AI is divided in basically 4 levels: in forbidden AI, in a high-risk AI, in AI which needs a bit of transparency, and the rest. And it's a pyramid. So you've got very small number of forbidden AI. It's actually for only 3.5 technologies. Then a fairly small amount of high risk, a slightly bigger of the transparency, and then most of AI is not actually concerned at all by the obligations. And that actually is also, and that is combined, quite importantly, so with an approach which is contrary to the GDPR, does not rely on everybody identifying the risks themselves, at least in our proposal, but we have a list. So we have a list in the annex where everything which is high risk is listed. And the idea of that is to say that since we assume that only a small number of AI applications actually are concerned by the AI approach, by the AI Act, that most companies, and we have indeed estimated that something like 85 to 95% of companies are not concerned by the AI Act, that most companies can just go to the annex, see whether what they're doing is listed there, and if it's not, then they forget about it. They don't have to do anything. They don't have to carry out any assessment. They don't have to carry out any lawyers. All they have to do is check what am I doing? Is it in the list? Yes or no? It's not, game over. Don't have to do anything. Then we have 3 cases where you only have a minimum transparency requirement. So deepfakes. If you have a deepfake, if actually right now it's not me talking, but somebody else talking, and that is put my head on it, there would have to be a label somewhere on the screen saying this is a deepfake. This is like really literally only 3 words. This is a deepfake. Similarly, if you have let's say a phone-in help desk from a company where you complain and you talk to somebody on the phone, and that action AI system, it has to tell you at the beginning. Literally, again, this is an AI. Only where it's not obvious. Now, if you talk to your
apologize, Martin, to interrupt you. Just very briefly on the deepfakes. I think, yeah, this sounds like a minimum requirement, but I think it will really help. For example, many of us noticed the Pope in this quote, which was the deepfake made by Midjourney version 5, which made headlines. And actually, yeah, there was intentionally not mentioning this is deepfake. And if it would be not so much broad excitement. So, and there are much more deepfakes. We saw pictures of Donald Trump. It's not kind of secret. It's publicly out there, and many people around the globe were believing that those are real pictures because the abilities and capabilities of the systems are so hard to, let's say, distinguish from the real stuff, really, from the real photos. etc. So I think it sounds like a minimum requirement, but if there would be an obligation to put the deepfake notice there, I think it will help. But also we may mention that this goes to users, also not just the developers, but the users that will be using the AI solutions. Thank you. Please continue.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, when I meant a minimum requirement, I mean what you actually have to do. The requirement itself is minimum, but of course it's a very big problem. But I think this is actually the best trade-off you can have. You have a very big problem which you can solve with a very small requirement. So we have the deepfakes, we have the transparency that you're talking to an AI system. You know, if it's not obvious, if you talk to your car, you don't have to tell anybody because you know that. And it's also emotion recognition if a system uses emotion recognition when you're dealing with it. And in these three cases, all you have to do is literally put 3 words either on the screen or put 3 words on a website or say them at the beginning. So it's really very minimal requirements. And then we've got the high-risk AI, which is what everybody's talking about. And I think there's a misconception because when you talk about something being high, it's actually our own fault. I mean, we use the wrong words because when you talk about something being high risk, it's something you kind of want to avoid, right? I mean, if you're telling somebody what you're doing is really risky, what you're trying to say is, well, are you sure you want to do this? Maybe you don't want to do this. And that is not at all the intention. For the high risk category of AI, the Commission thinks they are useful applications you can do there, but because they can have huge impact on people, for example, in terms of judicial affairs or recruitment or access to social services, it's important that you have quality standards to make sure that they're done right and without any, with the necessary requirements, no discrimination, giving people the right to contest, et cetera, et cetera. So that these things, high risk doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that you need to have certain quality standards. And last but not least, and that's the one where, that's why I always make a distinction between good AI and bad AI. All of the things I've been talking about so far is good AI. It's AI which is very useful, it's helpful, you know, as long as you do it right, it's fine. But there's also 3.5 cases of AI which is, you know, fundamentally it's like bad AI. The first one is social scoring. You know, there's which is listed as a forbidden case. And the image everybody thinks about is always, you're talking about China, you know, you have 1,000 points, everything is controlled. When you cross a traffic light in red, they take a point away from you, and when you have less than 500 points, you're not allowed to take the train anymore. You know, that's clearly something we don't want to see. I always tell people that you should not believe that this is purely bureaucratic. I mean, it's not something which only happens in China. The example I always give is, you know, nowadays we're very concerned about CO2, so you want to measure your CO2 footprint, right? So you want to measure how much your car consumes, and then how much your heating consumes, and then how much your food consumes, and your other activities. So, you know, basically you want to measure everything you do. And then, you know, if you know your CO2 footprint, wouldn't it be good if you had some rewards? So, you know, be rewarded for having a lower CO2 footprint, or maybe, you know, punished for having a higher CO2 footprint. And then all of a sudden you have a system which looks very much like the Chinese system we've been talking about. You know, your entire life is being measured one way or the other, and depending on the points you have, you get rewards or are punished. So it's not something which is you know, a remote theoretical possibility. It's something which you really have to take seriously, even in the West. And then we have applications which exploit the vulnerabilities of vulnerable groups, children, handicapped, elderly people. We have subliminal technologies. So if you like flashing lights in order to make people nervous, or other technologies where people don't realize how technology is trying to influence them. And then we have the vexed question of the face recognition. Nowadays we call it biometric identification, because in the future, well, already now you can, but not quite as good. You can identify people by the way they walk, obviously by their voice, by the patterns of their veins. But the most talked about and the most developed right now is face recognition. And here the important thing is, of course, we're talking about the identification of people. We're not talking about unlocking your mobile phone with your face. So not a one-to-one match. You know, we have an image. Is this the image? Can I get in? But rather identifying people out of a crowd. You know, the typical example is you have a camera on a market square, on the train station, and then you have 100,000 people going through, and you're looking for a person. That's only allowed under very specific circumstances, such as, well, in our proposal, such as if you have an imminent threat to a terrorist attack. But that's a very controversial proposal, and I'm sure the Parliament, the colleague from the Parliament will say something about that, because I know they're discussing that very, very intensely.
Thank you very much, Martin. And then you mentioned Parliament. Thank you very much for listening. Mr. Stefanius, maybe, how do you see the situation now? We discussed it, you indicated a little bit, but maybe what are the, let's say, at least principles or value that you are kind of defending or protecting within the, let's say, European People's Party, and in general, maybe since we need to talk also about the final, let's say, version of the AI Act, is, according to your views and information, going Parliament towards to the general approach? So it means that the agreement could be reached sooner rather than later, or it is really hard to say because there are so many different and maybe antagonic, let's say, efforts and different positions within the European Parliament members, that even for them it would be difficult to agree on some compromise, and not just even more to agree with the Council. So what you can share about that? How do you see the direction, let's say, and the expectations we may see at the end of April and maybe in May, and etc.?
Right. As I mentioned before, it is really a timely discussion because currently it is discussed very, very widely in the European Parliament. I basically agree in principle, and I think there is a general agreement among political parties to support categorization in 4 categories, as it was described by the European Commission. So there is a general support for that. I think what is quite deeply discussed, what is in which category, and I'm positive can find the agreement about that. What are the principles which should be kept? I think, first of all, it must be definition. So what is AI, what is not AI? So it is also related not only to the definition, but also to the scope. For example, in terms of face recognition, we oppose that in the European People's Party. So I think my feeling is that the majority of members of Parliament will oppose it as well. It's quite important that this legislation will be aligned across the sector. So there will be not different rules sector by sector, but there will be some alignment. We are fighting for so-called sandboxes. So it means if there is some innovation in practice, so there must be some time and some environment for testing that. So if there is a chance to test it and to see the benefits and also the threat. Also, what is quite important from a European perspective is that we will keep fundamental human rights. And this is the difference between, of course, implementation of AI principles in democracies versus autocracies. The major difference how AI will be implemented. We really highlight the principle of keeping human rights and decision-making process based on the individual decision-making. What is very important from perspective, the consumer will get the information whether this product or service includes AI or not, and can choose whether to use AI or not AI. And last but not least, this is the most important principle, that human decision will be at the end of the day. Really, human being will be person, human will be body, decision-making body, which will make decision whether to use or not use artificial intelligence. And I think this principle will create also trust. It was mentioned already today, I think very quickly, that one objective of this AI is trust, because we lack trust in the European Union, but also in comparison with China and also in comparison with less citizens in the European Union trust AI implementations or AI applications. So what we have to focus on is to create trust, and therefore keep the principle is quite crucial. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stefans. There is, just to let you know that there's, I think, at least to me, a little technical disruption coming from your side. I see nodding, Martin and Andre. So likely you could not fix it right now, but just let you know that maybe if you speak slower too, it would be better, but just to keep you informed. And maybe going to Malte and having read the question we have actually that about the discussions, it's quite of general, but I'd like to say that it's really difficult from which angle you tackle the issue, because it's so many to discuss. And we already heard from Martin from European Commission that they started discussions years ago, and now the next discussions may take some time to really to agree on the issues. And those points mentioned by Martin, Mr. Stefanians, and others are important in order. Sometimes they may sound general, but they are important for the final say on how the AI Act would finally will look like, and what does it mean for the application. But going to, let's say, to be also a little bit, of course, more practical, it's also in the narrative of this event. Maybe Malte, can you please briefly describe us the way Amazon is developing and deploying the AI for its customer, let's say, which use cases can you offer? Because we also see in the questions, we can nicely link it to the questions for the innovation, let's say for the education, for the healthcare, for example. And also, since and given the origins of Amazon in the US, how do you see the role in the EU AI ecosystem? And maybe even more, does Amazon consider the needs and demand in the EU in your AI development? So I think many of us will be interesting to hear your view on that.
Yeah, happy to elaborate a bit on these points. Maybe to start with, and that is very important, since that is part of, let's say, Amazon's DNA, we are strictly customer-centric, meaning no matter which business we do, which AI we plan, we always start from, well, what does the customer want? So that drives us very much. And that is then actually also then determining, of course, how we train AI, how we deploy it in our services. So that's where we start, and then we work backwards. So we are not developing AI because we want to have AI. So it's always also integrated. It's part of products that we are offering to our customers. And we do this for a while already. So it's, well, it was before I joined Amazon, obviously, but it's more than 20 years that we work in artificial intelligence and machine learning. And of course, then, yeah, accordingly, we have some experience in this regard. And well, customers are not only in the US, obviously. So we have a lot of customers in Europe. Europe is a very important market for us. And that is, of course, then also driving AI that we develop, that we deploy. And that, well, refers to a broad variety. You all know Amazon to some degree, at least. So it might be users of Alexa. It might be business customers that use from AWS. So our cloud subsidiary, let's say, Amazon Web Services, specific business solutions. So we have a lot of customers here in Europe, and that drives our action, our standards. So I think it's not too far to say that, of course, we consider all these values, this demand simply as such. And we have significant number, of course, of scientists working only on AI. We're very transparent there as well. So it's certainly thousands that work on these developments and then the deployment of AI. That includes, of course, Europe. So we have many research centers. In Germany, we have some who really do significant work for our AI research. We actually, that I also would like to mention, we have a research center in Poland, and Alexa, which I mentioned earlier, well, one could say it's the origin is from Poland, from Gdansk. So that was in, I think, 2013, when Amazon bought a company there, which is actually the source then for Alexa. So I would say, well, we are rooted here in Europe as well. And accordingly, that's something we, of course, consider. And the AI Act, well, no need to mention, it's very important for us accordingly. You talked about use cases, maybe to elaborate a bit on some, and that's only a small selection, of course. We have AI all over the place across our services, across our processes. So, and that also refers to one topic that Martin had mentioned earlier, So facial recognition, biometric identification, that's the term used in the AI Act. So that is Alexa and what we do there. So we have, of course, their voice recognition. That's what a voice assistant is all about, which is AI driven. So what does that mean? Alexa, you can talk to Alexa, our voice assistant. Alexa understands and then helps you in all different kind of situations, provides information, or you can do it as a tool to steer, to monitor, to manage your smart home, for example, and it recognizes your voice. So I have Alexa at home. Alexa recognizes whether it's Malte speaking to her or whether it's my 6-year-old son. And accordingly, my son is not allowed to do everything. I'm, of course, have a bit more liberty depending on what my wife allows, but so there's a differentiation in there, which is visual, it's voice identification, which is biometric identification. It's certainly completely different from what Martin described earlier, monitoring, surveying public spaces, but it's the same category possibly. So there are a lot of these examples that we find in the AI Act where we wonder, okay, would that mean that suddenly this service, which was maybe not meant to be in the scope, is suddenly regulated or not? So we there hope there for some specifications. And there are many more examples for Alexa, of course. Another point maybe to highlight in this context is the more recent also discussion that is about recommenders. So AI used to recommend products, for example, which we use, of course, in our marketplace. We all know this, at least those who use Amazon as a portal to buy things. So there's, of course, also using AI to simply offer attractive products to customers, to make recommendations. So there are a lot of other use cases. I mentioned already general purpose AI that is offered to business customers. And for each of these categories, we will, and we do, of course, think about whether we would be regulated or not, how this will impact us. And I think for each of these categories, we also, policymakers have to think about, are there really risks? Is it risky? Are specific safeguards justified or not? So that I would say is a challenge for policymakers, but then of course also for us.
Thank you, Martin, for this. I think it was really quite practical. I like your use case of the Alexa because
can I just comment on that? Because I can reassure you that that's not a problem. For the simple reason that the discussion, of course, which we are having now on the Act, is talking about law enforcement. It's not talking about private companies, for the simple reason that private companies are currently forbidden from doing that anyway. Forbidden from doing what I'm telling, having a camera on a large market square, because under General Data Protection Regulation, you need the approval of the people surveyed, which you have in your family, obviously. Clearly you are there, you are responsible for your children, or maybe your wife has given a consentment, so that's perfectly legal. But clearly that's not something you can do on a market square, because they have 100,000 people and you cannot ask all of them. So already right now, private companies cannot do it. However, law enforcement does not fall under GDPR. That's a law enforcement directive. So basically, in short, don't be afraid for Alexa. That's a different issue.
Right. I mean, generally, we, of course, have in this discussion the challenge. There was a proposal from the Commission, which has been, there are amendments from the Council, how to adjust it. And then, of course, the Parliament has a view. So in the end, let's see what will be the final result. But good to hear that, the Commission did not have that use case on the radar. And you're completely right, of course.
Yeah, thank you, Martin, for this add-on on that. And yeah, you mentioned many good points, Malte. I think on the you mentioned this personalization or customization that in the Alexa recognize whether it's you or your son, etc., or your wife, even, of course. And this is, I think, one of the main added values, of course, of this technology, that we won't all have, let's say, personal assistants, or in the future, maybe not now, and if they would be safe, trustworthy, etc. But I think when I said to Alexa, for example, play me a song that I like, or the style that I like, that it plays something that I really like, not something which can randomly be found on, let's say, on some application. But on the other side, and you can use it even more for let's say, severe issues like personalized medicine, which means that really it can address the diagnosis and treatment my problems according to, let's say, my DNA, and not according to some, let's say, general already acceptable approaches. So there is a huge potential in AI applications, and we have to be careful to how to find the right balance. And Andre, you've been kind of silent for a while, but I have a question on you, since you are really we have you here as a representative who are discussing on a regular basis the issues with businesses. And talking about this risk, high risk approach, especially, are you aware, let's say, of any surveys, how it impacts not just the, I would not like to mention tech giants or big tech, but let's say the big players, but let's say the middle range enterprises and the SMEs, especially in Europe, in Czech Republic, in Slovakia, or elsewhere in Europe, whether there are already, let's say, some at least preliminary studies on the impact of especially these high risk requirements for the businesses. And maybe from your personal, let's say, experience, do you have any kind of I would not say hearsaying, but maybe insights that if, let's say, you're discussing with the startup and they say, okay, if the European Commission is imposing that requirements that you are mentioning to me now on our solutions, we would rather move to US, to UK, or Israel, for example. Are you also getting in touch with such views on when you discuss these high risk applications, AI high risk system applications on the solutions of SMEs, etc.?
Yeah, so about the survey, I believe Malte already mentioned some numbers from the survey I know that was conducted in some EU countries in December. Unfortunately, not in Czechia or Slovakia, but even though I believe the results can be useful for us for the discussion and also for the regulators, and we can see that about 30% of AI system would be classified as high risk, which goes way beyond the assumption in the assessment, policy impact assessment by the Commission. If I remember correctly, that was about 5 to 15% of AI system should be considered as a high risk. So that's that's the main problem for these startups, these high risk systems obligations. Regarding the general purpose AI, that's a surprise for me, but 45% would consider their solution as a GP AI. And regarding the relocation, in 16% of startups from this survey consider stopping to develop AI or relocation outside the EU, or stopping to provide services in the EU, and, for example, provide the services only in the States. That's the case of one of our clients. And he told me, we have the huge majority of our business is in the States, so let's not bother with EU rules, and we will continue with our services in the States. Regarding this relocation, I'm not sure if it's a real genuine plan of these startups, or if it's only like some strong words now during the negotiation. But yeah, I believe the impact of AI Act would be bigger than originally intended for these SMEs.
Thank you for that. I think some of the numbers you mentioned are quite huge, I would say, and really should be considered when making these policies. And
sorry, Tomáš, maybe I can add because also VC funds, venture capital funds, were asked during this survey, because they are really important for these startups, for the innovation ecosystem. So reaction of VC funds on the AI Act will heavily impact the future of AI scene in Europe, because without VC funding, we won't have further development of AI solutions. And I expect it maybe that overall investments will be reduced the higher the regulation is for the sector. So high-risk solutions might get no funding at all, or would have to be so unique and with enormous business potential, that the risk for VC would be acceptable. So another option for the VC that was mentioned in the survey, that these VC will relocate their investment overseas or relocate outside the AI startups, and they will fund startups from other fields. So either way, it can have some negative impact on the whole AI scene.
Thank you for this. Is something we need to certainly address. And before I will go to the issue of this innovation competitiveness and the global perspective, which may be of interest of the attendees here, I encourage all the participants here to write their questions on the Q&A sessions. If it's better for you, you can do it in an anonymous way, and to ask questions you would like to pose, you can pose any question, and we'll see how far we can go with our colleagues here. And yeah, we discussed this. Thank you, Andrzej, for your insights on the investing, let's say, or the investing attitude of the venture capital funds to these solutions, model solutions. And we have to be aware, as it is all in the narrative, we are kind of racing for the talent, talking about at the global scale, let's say, between the US and China and Israel, etc. We have India is really evolving, and more and more countries are going, I would say, increasing their investments into the innovation clusters and etc. And maybe the question here to Mr. Stefanians and to Martin really is that on one side, yeah, we are fighting for this talent as well, and the solutions, we want to have them here. But on this other side, we also would like to, I guess, to protect the fundamental rights we already experience and enjoy in Europe. And we have them different, let's say, of freedom of speech, also comparing to US. I'm not talking even about the China, etc. Martin mentioned this social scoring system. So there is completely, I would say, different position on certain aspects. But since Europe has the ambition, let's say, to make those rules global, let's say, or at least to build, let's say, a stronger, I would say, coalition where the principles of AI, in order to could be shared. How do you maybe see, what can you tell us, let's say, about the interconnections with US, for example, or UK, maybe, since they're out of the EU? Would they accept this risk-based approach, firstly, and actually on the principles we discuss, and on the rights and values we want to protect? How would you maybe briefly describe our efforts as a Europe to make them accept from our side the offer for such a legal framework? That maybe Mr. Stefanians, you can start, and Martin can follow up.
That's really a very important point, because we definitely do not want to overburden also our business environment. And I'd like to ensure everybody that particularly interested SMEs are taking into consideration. We really have it in every piece of legislation, and particularly in terms of digitalization. And that's a very important highlight. Basically, we have established an organization called SME Europe in European Parliament, which objective is to improve business environment from point of view of small businesses. So particularly digital legislation is under the radar from this point of view. Secondly, this is a very important point you raised, that how basic democracies can cooperate and how we can establish some kind of standards, at least in democratic world, because it would be ideal that we have the same standards for AI everywhere. I'm afraid that we are not able to achieve it, and we are not able to achieve agreement, particularly with autocracies like China. They have different objectives, they have different views, but at least we can talk to them and to talk with the objective to establish at least some kind of platform. But in terms of discussions with democracies, there is quite deep discussion with you, as you can also in Japan, with Japan, for example. Even tomorrow we have discussion with Japanese colleagues on parliamentary level with the objective to implement at least similar rules. And from my point of view, there is quite a lot of interest from outside EU, what we are going on, working on, what's going on in the European Union, and most democracies are ready to compete. I had a discussion even in Kenya, in Africa. They are watching digital legislation and even AI Act, how it is implemented in EU, because democratic countries like to compete. We have to be aware of the fact that there is nothing similar in the world, and EU will be the first. So all similar countries, at least democratic countries, are ready to follow, and we are discussing with this topic with them.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stefanec, and Martin, if you can follow up on that.
Yeah, maybe first of all, we should keep the figures that we have been quoting in context. We've been talking to the people of the study. This is not a representative survey, and the people who did it don't actually claim that it is. So it's kind of useful to understand what kind of problems people may have, but it doesn't give you any kind of real knowledge about the situation of the market. It's a bit if you want to do let's say a voting forecast for your national government election, you put up a website and then 65% of the people who happen to be on the website vote for something, and you say 65% is therefore the probability that this party gets. Now that clearly doesn't work. So it's interesting for us because we've been talking to them about the different use cases, but it's not something we should take as a statistical data. Having said that, it is clear that at this stage there's a lot of uncertainty. I think that's unavoidable. The discussions haven't. I mean, the political process is going on. There are applications which we included, which have been kicked out by the council. Maybe the parliament will be reinstated. That it's perfectly normal that companies right now are confused. That's, however, something which happens whenever you have a political decision-making process, and that's exactly why we have this transition period at the end of 2 or 3 years, so that once it has been established and it's clear which companies and which applications are covered, that from then on they have 2 years to actually deal with. They don't have to deal with it right now. They still have enough time to do that once the dust has settled and things are really clear. And on the international affair, on the international aspect, of course, the interesting thing is, I mentioned earlier, we are the first ones to have this. Well, we were the first ones to propose it, and we got comments from plenty of other countries, Iraq, Brazil, countries which we didn't. I mean, we got obviously plenty of comments from the US and UK, but that's kind of expected, which clearly showed how much this has been followed by the rest of the world. And also, it is something which you can see now. I mean, especially after ChatGPT, much of the discussion about regulation comes from the US. The letter of Elon Musk and all the others. That's a large part of the US community, which is active there. You have different proposals in the United States. You have Canada, which has already been active, has already some kind of legislation, partial legislation. The Chinese are regulating as well, not necessarily in the way we would regulate, but they clearly have decided that this is also something that needs to be regulated. So there's clearly a general recognition by policymakers across the world that AI is a technology which needs some specific regulation. And I think that's therefore something that Europe can work with in trying to find something which everybody can agree on. Of course, once you talk about this kind of issue, it gets more difficult the more operational you become. So when you talk about general principles, everybody agrees. Now that's also why you have the OECD principles. They're fairly abstract and therefore at a level where everybody can agree without too much trouble. Once you put that into practice, then of course it gets more complicated, and we'll have to see how that develops. But I think the situation in which we are is that we think that something should be done. Plenty of other people think that should be done as well, and that's, I think, a common ground on which you can build, trying to find an international compromise. Whether that actually will happen or not, I have no idea. It just seems to me that this is not something you should discard. It's not something absurd. Yeah, if there was ever international compromise, yeah, sure. No, but it's something which could really be possible in the coming years. We'll have to see how that develops.
Thank you, Martin, for that. I think it's interesting to see that maybe it pop-ups in our heads that the regulation could be the answer to many, let's say, questions, let's say, and the challenges that systems like generative AI brings. Yeah, and you mentioned repeatedly the point that we are the first one, and somebody needs to done it. Of course, there is U.S. Bill of Rights. Of course, UK is thinking of their regulation, etc. You mentioned China, and the countries are kind of really increasing their attention to that. But on the other side, really to tackle all the challenges, it's a really difficult one. And before going to the questions of the audience, I'd like to give one question to our participants, to Ondřej and Malte. And this is one thing about, since we will not avoid the regulation of the AI, what maybe should the EU avoid in order to not lose the competitiveness or innovative potential comparing to our partners at a global scale? So what should be, according to your expertise and maybe the interests you represent, avoided at the final version or result of these negotiations? Malte, please start, and Ondřej can follow up.
First, okay, right. And I mean, as I said earlier, we're not per se against the regulation. So really it's now about how to specify it properly. What should policymakers not do? Or let's do it, maybe let's phrase it positively. I mean, legal certainty is of course important. The one thing is about who is reasonable. Yeah, hopefully, yes. But then of course, are they clear? And there's certainly, fully agree, a big process, let's say, after adoption concerning standard setting. The Commission will maybe have some tasks there as well, so that process will be crucial. And there we also hope for a dialogue between EU policymakers and other stakeholders to ensure interoperability. Market interoperability between Europe and other regions is key, particularly if EU wants to catch up concerning AI and innovation. There must not be a silo approach. So the technical standards are probably very important. Let's see how the process will look like. That's something under discussion as well. So there we have hope that it will be a good process, that also all relevant stakeholders are consulted, that the right experts are having a voice, that they can contribute to this process. That's also extremely important from our point of view. Then of course, last but not least, also that we talk very much about the categories, the use cases, but also the applicable requirements. Of course, they need to be proportionate, they need to be clear, they need to be targeted. And also there's some more work that needs to be done. We believe that because it's a horizontal approach, the requirements probably need to be more general, high level, but then clearly specified during the standard setting process. They should also rather look on what's the result, what should they, well, reach, and not that much about, well, let's say, not more output related, less input related. And last but not least, they should also then probably be more objective driven, meaning they should specifically address the risk of the use case. So not all the requirements seem to be proportionate for each of the use cases. Right. I mean, if this is all said right, then probably this can become a success story, the AI Act. Then maybe Brazil, other regions, I don't know, really don't know, may look to Europe and think, oh, that's an interesting approach. If it's not done right, it can be the opposite. So therefore, there's a huge responsibility, as said earlier.
Thank you very much for these insightful thoughts. Thank you, Malte. Ondřej, what is your view on that?
Yeah, I can totally agree with Malte that the clarity of the new regulation is the key for its success. And just only by establishing clear guidelines and requirements for the development and the use of the AI, the AI Act can increase public trust in AI and promote development of safe, reliable, ethical AI solutions. I may sound overly critical during the discussion, but I'm a fan of this regulation. I'm not saying that only because I'm a lawyer and it will give me some, some work to do, but there are clear risks associated with the uncontrolled development and use of AI that cannot be managed, I believe, without regulation. Relying on business to self-regulate is completely naive. Elon Musk may famously call for a pause in development of AI, but his company merrily carries on. So the clarity is the key for the success of this regulation. And to say advice to legislators what not to do is please do not rush. We are talking about first AI regulation in the world that could serve as a role model for the other regulations in the world, like GDPR, and now we have a Californian Privacy Act that was inspired by GDPR. And so we need to be absolutely sure that the AI Act will provide a much needed fragile balance between interests of business and interests and rights and freedom of us, of Europeans. So I believe that not rushing to the final regulation is a good choice within this process.
Thank you, Andrzej. Yeah, I can fully agree on that. Yeah. Okay. We have some questions here, but also we have kind of 15 minutes left. So let's go to the questions. Yeah. The first unanswer yet is that, do you think that AI tools such as ChatGPT can be compliant with the principle of data minimalization? And do you see any similarities with search engines, for example, Google, where individuals do not consent with the processing of their data by the search engine providers? It seems to me a little bit more technical question, but is there anybody from you that'd like to, in let's say 1 minute, to tackle that question, or at least the first or the second part of it?
Well, I mean, data minimization is not really what comes to mind when you're talking about ChatGPT. I mean, they have 175, well, ChatGPT-3 had 175 billion parameters, and the ChatGPT-4, I think it's even bigger than that. So whatever they're doing, they're not minimizing data. Which is also why I think the discussion about general purpose AI, I think is not really something which is very relevant for small startups. I mean, if you have a startup with 3 or 4, the OpenAI, I think they spend something like $1 billion just on hosting for all the data. So most startups with 3 or 4 people will not have $1 billion to spend on developing a very large model. So there's clearly there are clearly problems for startups. But when you're talking about things like ChatGPT and the very large language models, they tend to be concentrated in a small number of very large companies typically. I think that's something we need to keep in mind.
Yeah, that's absolutely. Thank you, Martin, for that point. Actually, for the entire answer. Yeah, but this is something we need to keep in mind, that who's behind it and what resources is needed in order to kind of develop that systems and to implement the rules. So it's certainly not for everybody, given the resources needed. So let's go to further question.
Thomas, if I may add something regarding the GDPR, that's really interesting topic now being thoroughly discussed around Europe, and also in schools, for example, and with our clients. And I agree with Martin that the data minimization is not the biggest issue I see, but if we look into GDPR, we can find the right to be forgotten. So every person has the right to have his or her data to be erased. And I'm not sure how if you put some of your personal data into ChatGPT, how this data can be erased. I believe it's not possible, and you cannot enforce this right, and that can be a problem.
Thank you, Andrzej. Thank you, and it actually nicely links us to the question of how do you expect to enforce the regulation. I think the primary participants here is Mr. Stefaniec and Mr. Martin Ulbrich can say us really briefly how, since you mentioned already on Andrzej, the right under the GDPR to be forgotten, and the concerns about its enforceability. Martin, would be Commission and the member states ready at 2027? You mentioned some of the rights, actually obligations start sooner, but at 2028, let's say, to enforce this regulation according to your view and maybe your personal feeling, Mr. Štefanec, I would be interested also in your view on that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a mechanism provided for in the AI Act. Implementation is done by the member states, and we have a fairly traditional system of conformity assessments or self-assessment, depending on what exactly you're talking about. There's a database for the high-risk applications, and then you have the national authorities which are supervising that, just like you have the data protection authorities right now. So it's the enforcement is fairly standard practice. Of course, we have to keep in mind, very important, that the regulation applies to everything sold or used in Europe. So it's the same for foreign products or services or European, it's just like GDPR. So anything you sell or it doesn't give an advantage to foreign producers, because if you want to sell in Europe, then you have to follow European rules, no matter where the actual development took place.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Mr. Štefanec?
Yes, I agree with that. So we have quite long trial process ahead of us, and during this trial process also we can talk about enforcement, and still from point of view of time, there is a lot of time to enforce it by member states. In comparison with other pieces of legislation, for example, Digital Services Act, Digital Markets Act, they should be implemented sooner than AI Act. So honestly, I'm not afraid of enforcement. If legislation is prepared in the right way, if it is simple, I do believe it can be also stable.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Štefanec. And I would combine two next questions, and maybe we will be able to respond to all of them we have, but likely not the other ones. So if somebody wants to post, please do it now is another question. But also in respecting of time of our panelists, we may be a little bit longer, but maybe to 3:35. So let's go to the questions. Yeah. Dear Ivan, hi Malte, dear presenters, what do you think about the warnings voiced by Elon Musk and others? And I would join and combine these questions also, because it seems to me kind of from the same kind of perspectives. Do you expect regulations can substitute for ethics? Because one of the certain risks go to ethics, certain risks goes to really the future of the humanity. So maybe in one sentence, and let's say starting with Malte, then to go to Ondřej, and then Martin and Ivan. Mr. Štefanec, what can you say, and what is in your head when you see such questions? And yeah, Malte.
Yeah, well, that's a quite global question. I mean, the broader question would be, would we as Amazon see risks related to AI? Yes, I mean, of course. And I mean, who could not, depending on the broad variety of AI use cases? That's a different question from, is AI risky, or are most use cases risky? And that is, I mean, again, we talked about this today a couple of times, essentially goes back to the risk-based approach. So yes, address the risk, but not other things. So therefore, it's a general question, what I think or we think about risks, and should we consider them? Definitely, and there need to be a good mechanism, a future-proof mechanism. I think that's the main challenge also. The technology is moving quickly. It will certainly not stop, no matter what probably Europe does. So there will be further innovation, and we and policymakers, including then of course other stakeholders, need to think about how to anticipate this, how to draft an approach that works, how to constantly have a dialogue, assess, contribute, exchange views, and by this then finding the right solutions. Sorry, it's a quite general response, but I feel that I could not go much more into detail here.
Thank you, Malte. I think it was perfectly fine. Ondřej?
Yeah, it's hard for me to take Elon Musk seriously when talking about AI. I don't know if you call it, but I believe it was yesterday. He said he will create a rival for ChatGPT called Truth GPT, because ChatGPT has a liberal bias, and he plans to counter with his own creation, and only his generative AI system would be the truthful and with right opinion. So that's why I'm not taking Elon Musk seriously. But anyway, I think that these warnings are relevant. I think it's not relevant to calling for stop or delay or stop the development of the AI. I've heard about a pretty new initiative of some members of European Parliament to convene some US-EU summit about AI regulation. And this is something that may much more sense for me to try to find the common ground for the AI regulation, at least with the US. So I believe that that's the right way, and not stopping the development of the AI.
Thank you, Andrzej. And you mentioned the bias issue, which is a really broad category of concerns, and really from the technical ones to the societal ones. So Martin, Mr. Stefanec, there's the sub questions of, can the regulation substitute the ethics, and also what do you think about this Elon Musk warnings? Martin can start, and then yeah.
Well, I mean, the question of regulation and ethics, of course, has been debated along. I mean, we did have the ethics group, and we had the ethics guidelines, and it was felt that it's good to have guidelines which are non-binding, but in the end, you need to have laws, legislation. And of course, the legislations are supposed to be the embodiment of the ethics. I mean, that's really the way it works. The guidelines, they had 7 principles. 5 of them are the requirements we have now in the AI Act. So it's really, the legislation is an attempt to make the ethics approach binding. Elon Musk, how will I say that? I mean, I take him serious. Well, I take him more seriously than other people. Let me try to put it this way. If somebody else said, AI is really dangerous, and if you have any kind of average academic or average NGO where saying AI is dangerous, you have to stop it. That's one thing. If Elon Musk does it, it's a different thing. I mean, he's actually part of the founders of OpenAI. So ChatGPT is actually produced by the company he created. And he clearly knows what he's talking about, and he's clearly not alone. I mean, that's the other thing. If it was only Elon Musk, okay. But there are a fairly large number of quite famous, more importantly, quite important people in the AI domain. So it's not just Elon Musk and then some absurd people who have just some strange ideas, but it's quite maybe not a majority, maybe a minority of only 10 or 15% of people who work in the AI domain, but it's an important group of people with certainly higher competence than I have. So that's why I take them seriously. Do I think it's realistic? No. If you say we're going to stop AI development for 6 months, that's something you cannot really verify. First of all, it's a bit like in 1945, where if the US had said, okay, let's stop it for 6 months, and the Russians would have said, yes, okay, let's stop it for 6 months, and then each of them would have continued to do secretly. So no, I don't think it's gonna happen. But honestly, I don't think that the signatories actually think this is going to happen. I think it's more a symbolic message, trying to tell people there's something dangerous, we have to do something, as opposed to they expecting that governments would actually say, oh yes, oh yeah, let's just stop for 6 months. I mean, that's really unrealistic.
Thank you, Martin, for that. We would be interested also, Mr. Stefanec, on your views on that.
Yeah, definitely, I take into consideration comments of Elon Musk, but I still think there are more opportunities rather than threats, and I'm closer to the view of Bill Gates, who expressed himself like the new revolution coming with AI, like internet or mobile phone. So I'd like to rather see more opportunities and take it from positive view rather than from a concerns point of view. In terms of regulation, whether it can substitute ethical code, my answer is no. We know that at the end, this legislation is very, very close to ethical code, and at the end, AI decisions are basically about ethical code. But my answer is we need both. We need formal and informal rules as well. We need ethical code, but also we need some legislative framework for future, which will create also a platform which can be stable or for all the players. Thank you.
Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
if I may
Yeah,
just,
sure.
yeah, I mean, of course, it's true that, you know, legislation doesn't replace ethics. There's a very famous poem by, I think it's Yeats or whoever, who said that, talking about people dreaming of systems so perfect that nobody has to be good. You know, people dreaming of legislation which makes sure that everything is perfect, even if people don't behave in an ethical, moral sense. That's not possible. Legislation can only be the basics, but then you need humans to behave in an ethical way. In addition, that's clearly a necessary condition for anything to work.
Thank you, Martin. Yeah, we have a question on how mature is AI nowadays, respectively, which areas mature well and which not so. So would somebody like to tackle that question? Let's say in which sectors, just broadly, let's say it's kind of proven and working well without that much, I would say, errors or adverse or unexpected consequences. Maybe Malte, you, according to you, your services, let's say, and your experience,
yeah.
Where would you rely on AI outcomes, let's say, without too much, I don't know, challenging them? Let's say that you got the output and you say, okay, I'm going with that.
Oh, I think that's the by far broad majority of AI systems, either because there are no mistakes or mistakes that don't matter. And I mean, you mentioned earlier an example, play my favorite music, Alexa. I mean, yes, there might be once in a while a song that I don't like too much. Very often it helps. I find new music, great. It's good customer experience. So I think that's the more important question. So there might be, I mean, what is really 100% error-free on Earth and concerning AI? That's the one question. The more important question is it problematic if there are once in a while mistakes? And there are systems where there shouldn't be a mistake, shouldn't be, or every mistake needs to be erased as much as possible. But in other areas, one could say, fine, if there's a mistake once in a while, still it doesn't need regulation or provision.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. The mistake should not happen, but there is kind of, I would say, different. Yeah, when the Alexa play me the music I don't like, and I think we can all agree that something different is if there is any error, let's say in some diagnosis or treatment or someone. I think these are the areas, and maybe this goes to the questions. I do apologize that we are going a little bit over the time, but just two more questions. One is about what do you think about training AI models on sensitive data? Banks, insurance companies, health data. Do you support the cooperation of such institutions, or are you more inclined to block them due to the data sensitivity and privacy protection? Who would like to? It's kind of challenging issue, but certainly something which will need to be, let's say, addressed, since, for example, European Commission is preparing these European health data spaces and would like to open also health data, of course, in anonymized way, but we would also cover the sensitive data. And actually they are already. Mr. Stefanius, would you like to say a few words?
Yes. Honestly, I don't have with that cooperation of companies. It is a business decision, but this question is related more to Data Act rather than to AI Act, because we tackle this issue in Data Act about sharing of data, and basically currently 80% of industrial data are not shared. So rather, we try to encourage companies, particularly small companies, to encourage to share more data, to have access to more data. Of course, under the condition that all the legislative acts are kept. So everything must be kept, particularly competition law must be kept, but the answer to this question is definitely yes.
Thank you very much. And there is the last question: can some of the existing regulations be effectively applied already without AI Act for new issues which may arise from the deployment of AI? Or are we in a regulatory vacuum for such cases? We a little bit touch upon that aspect, but maybe Andrzej, you as a lawyer that is dealing with different kind of regulations, and we mentioned it, that there's already, Martin already mentioned, we have GDPR, we have other regulations, sectoral regulation that is applying to some use cases. So do we need AI Act, or can we go without it and be sure that the existing legislation is also kind of broad, covering also the new use cases that may arrive?
Yeah, I think we need AI Act, and I believe Martin already mentioned it in the beginning of our discussion, that we have current regulation in place that can be, should be, and has to be applied on using AI system. We can mention GDPR, we can mention copyright law, we can mention product responsibility and this type of regulation. So we are definitely not in a state of regulatory vacuum, but I think that the AI systems are so complex, and it is big game changer that some AI specific regulation is needed, but that doesn't mean that you don't have to follow, for example, copyright rules.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I take it as a kind of closing remarks from you. And we came to the end of this event. First of all, thank you very much, Mr. Štefanec, Mr. Martin Ulbrich, Ondřej Vykoucal, and Malte Ferlus for joining us today, for having these discussions. I think there's been a lot of inspirational insights and thoughts that the attendees can take. We are living kind of a really crucial times, addressing the I would say really far, not just far-reaching, but breakthrough technology. This discussion is the example of how difficult it is, but on the other side, but also how necessary it is to put severe, let's say, attention on the issue. And there is much more we can discuss, but we are closing now. I would like to once again thank you, the ITAPA, for organizing this ITAPA Digital Talks, also MChip Slovakia, and as well Amazon, of course, for supporting this event and to make this happen. And we would like to invite you also to the Spring ITAPA, which will take place at 15 and 16 June this year in Sheraton Hotel Bratislava, organized by ITAPA, and also to follow the events and the links also from MChip Slovakia on the digital issues. But last but not least, thank you very much to the panelists and also to the audience and for actively participating in this discussion. So once again, wish you a nice afternoon, and let's hope that the right balance between the innovation, the regulatory aspects, and between the risks that needs to be covered would be achieved at the end of the day. So thank you very much to all, and have a good day. Have a good day.
Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye bye.